I'm Jim.
And I'm Garrett.
And this is
Jim and Garrett at the Movies.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Jim and Garrett at the Movies, where we review How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World. Big Hero 6 is our movie club entry, and then we will be talking about the Oscars. The Oscars, and I will be saying the words fucking Green Book like 8 times, I'm sure, during the course of our discussion of the Oscars. So, but before that, let's talk about How to Train Your Dragon 3, The Hidden World. This picks up after the events of the second film, where Hiccup and his pet dragon Toothless discover a new Night Fury, a new dragon similar to Toothless, in the dragon world that has now become the dragon utopia that has now become the place where Hiccup and his friends and family live. We pick up that plot line. There's a little bit of a love story between Toothless and the new Night Fury, and there's also a burgeoning love story between Hiccup and Astrid over the course of this film. So that's a brief sort of plot summary. Summary, not summary. What the hell happened to me? That's a brief plot summary. Let's sort of turn it over to you, Garrett. What did you think of How to Train Your Dragon 3?
Well, let me start by saying that I'm a big fan of this series in general. I've liked it since the first one, and so I was really excited going in to return to the world, and I was only somewhat disappointed overall. I mean, I still enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. It had many of the strengths of the prior two films, but it was slightly less engaging simply because the stakes just didn't quite really feel very heavy this time around. The emotional core of the film, I think, was very solid. Especially the end has a wonderful, wonderful sort of consilience and a powerful sort of emotional send-off. I mean, it's always possible they might make a fourth, but I don't think so. I think it really much felt like this was the close for the series, and it closed very, very effectively. And I love these characters. I think that Toothless might be like the best designed creature in decades. I mean, the only thing I can think to compare it Toothless to is maybe like the alien from Alien, in terms of just how awesomely designed it is. Toothless just hits all the emotional strings. I love anytime Toothless is on the screen. I'm happy, I'm smiling, I'm in a good place. So it carries with it for me a lot of positive emotional association and warmth. But that having been said, plot wise, there's some weaknesses here. We can delve into that in a little more depth, but that's my short summary. What about you, Jim?
Yeah, I agree with you mostly. Although I think my reaction to this film is more muted than yours, because I didn't have the emotional connection to How to Train Your Dragon and How to Train Your Dragon 2. I thought they were both basically fine films, and this was basically finer. It's the same type of thing, even if a little bit more muted. So for me, it didn't fully work. I wasn't buying into the characters and the world as well as I think you have in any of the How to Train Your Dragon. So this wasn't a film that I was particularly dying to see the end of the trilogy, because it didn't have the emotional connection to the characters the way you did. And when the final send-off happens, which I'm not spoiling anything. That's actually been kind of spoiled in other reviews before, although the specific machinations of it I won't spoil those. But it is those specific machinations that I found to be a little bit contrived. I thought that there were a lot of plot contrivances in this film, as though they had to get from one plot point to another, and some of the interstitial spaces of the film did not work for me as well. That said, I thought the animation was really quite good. I thought the character design was really good. I liked the vocal performances, especially by Jay Baruchel and F. Murray Abraham, who also plays a villain in this. There's sort of a war plot that's a C plot that's coming in on this thing that's kind of moving things over, moving things along rather. And so a lot of those plot lines didn't work for me. There wasn't too much of a character development for Hiccup to go through that it ended up kind of falling flat on a lot of levels for me.
Yeah, I hear you about the plot contrivances. Definitely, I think in particular in the second act, things felt like the characters made some nonsensical decisions, not based out of sort of the genuine stakes that were provided,
Right.
but rather because the film needed to shake things up and move things on. And given the position of strength that the characters are in at the end of the second movie and at the beginning of this one, it's hard for them to face any sort of real threat. And that's why I think one of the mistakes that they should have killed off a character either in the first act or the beginning of the second act to sort of to show the stakes, to sort of to get us a little more emotionally invested and to make us believe that F. Murray Abraham's Grimmel really is a genuine threat to our
Yes.
heroes and to their way of life. F. Murray Abraham's performance is fine. It's solid. I mean, he's a great villain. He always is. But the way he's written, it doesn't feel like they wanted him to be a badass, and they couldn't really come up with a convincing way to make him a badass. So they just said he's a badass, just believe it, and they sort of just want the audience to go along with that presupposition, and it felt forced and unmotivated. Which in turn made many of the characters' reactions to him to Grimmel as a character forced and unmotivated. So yeah, that's again, plot wise, the second act in particular, felt contrived and a little weak, but that didn't really undermine for me, I think, the potency of the third act in general and the last, I don't know, 5 minutes or so of the film, which in some ways felt a little disconnected from the rest of the film, precisely because that last 5 minutes is really working in a way that isn't particularly tied into the rest of the film. And the disconnection there is somewhat unfortunate, but nonetheless, I still think that those closing 5 minutes are a really solid 5 minutes, and like I say, an ample send off to the series.
Interesting. Yeah, it didn't work for me as much as it did for you. I think that I did pick up a kind of I wish I could spoil the ending. I'm not going to, of course, but I wish I could, because I think that there's kind of an environmentalist message going on here. One that's metaphorical and thematic in a way that would be interesting if it was more fully explored. But as it is, it as a whole, the characters themselves didn't work for me. So I had to find some sort of thematic emotional arc to attach myself to. I thought I saw one, but the problem is it wasn't really fully developed for me. So I ended up falling a little short on this one.
I somewhat wondered if maybe there was an immigration message going on in there, but yeah, by the time the film was over, I didn't really see that coalesce either. There is something of an overpopulation message, right? Like in the very beginning of the 1st act. If that's something that's particularly interesting to you. I mean, I suppose another sort of flaw, the title of the film, The Hidden World, the body of the film has very little to do with the hidden world. It's a fairly tiny fraction of the story. They easily could have named it any number of another elements in the actual plot that you had. It might not have had the mysticism of the hidden world, but it would have made a little bit more sense in terms of the actual narrative.
Well, it's a new, relatively new strategy that they're doing with sequels. Instead of calling something How to Train Your Dragon 3, they call it How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, because if you call it How to Train Your Dragon 3, then you're not going to get somebody who hasn't seen the first two How to Train Your Dragons to impulse buy your movie.
Right. I remember when Malcolm 10 came out, I thought, gosh, I haven't even seen the first 9 Malcolms.
Same thing with Leonard Part 6.
Yeah, well, that was the deliberate joke on that one, right?
Right. And yeah, Big Hero 6. I haven't seen the other Big Hero 5. Yeah.
Put a pin in that one. We're coming back to that.
We'll keep going with that joke. So yeah, as a whole, are we ready to wrap up on this film? Or
A little bit more I wanted to comment on.
yeah, sure.
I want to give considerable praise to an actor who I'd never heard of before in this, Justin Ruppel, who played the role of Tough Nut. Because god damn, as I was watching that movie, I thought, I'm surprised they brought TJ Miller back for the role of Tough Nut. And it wasn't until I left the film and checked IMDb to realize that wasn't TJ Miller. No, they didn't want him back as the role of Tough Nut, which is understandable given his recent unpleasantness. But Justin Ruppel, damn if he doesn't do one of the best TJ Miller impressions I've ever heard. He could just walk into any voice role that TJ Miller was going to do and replace him entirely. He could basically have his career if he wanted it at this point.
Justin Ruppel is the new Christopher Plummer. Well, the reference to Christopher Plummer taking over Kevin Spacey's role in All the Money in the World. Yes, I looked it up beforehand, so it wasn't much of a surprise for me. But yes, he does do a fantastic TJ Miller voice, and we can have Justin Ruppel take over the role in Big Hero 6 too. Yeah, it's. I agree with that. In fact, I think the whole voice cast in this film is really quite good, including Cate Blanchett, Gerard Butler, Craig Ferguson, America Ferrera, Kristen Wiig, Kit Harington, etc. They're all really quite good. Jay Baruchel, I already mentioned. So, anything else about this film? It didn't really strike me. Like these are some of the hard films to review because I didn't have much of a reaction to it, except you know.
Yeah, and in some ways it is a hard film to review because what I love about it and what doesn't work are pretty disconnected. I mean, again, I could watch 2 hours of just Toothless being toothless and I'd be happy, to be perfectly honest. I mean, the mating dance that he does, which shows up in the trailers, I'm never not going to smile when I see that. I find it just so adorable. It keys into those sort of basic sort of primal, big eye sort of child reactions that you get. I'm a cat person. I've had cats for much of my life, and obviously it triggers so many of those cat reactions. I love Toothless. Again, I can't praise the design of Toothless enough. The team that worked on that was just wonderful. And it is interesting to note that he is coming back to the screen with Kit Harington, who Toothless did a commercial with a couple of months back, which was a really good commercial that I loved and watched many times. You want to sell me anything at this point, really, you could just put Toothless in the commercial and I'll buy it. I'm a total sucker for Toothless at this point. So big.
Miriam liked a commercial. What?
Yeah, how's that, right?
You hate advertising as much as Bill Hicks.
On principle, I hate advertising, but I love Toothless. That's how much I love Toothless. So,
all right, well, that is interesting. I knew that you liked this franchise. I knew that this franchise had a that you had a soft spot in your heart for this franchise, but I didn't know that it was this that you had this much love for the characters. Yeah, I know we saw How to Train Your Dragon 2 together, but yeah, it never occurred to me that you like this franchise so much. Does liking this franchise this much push this into a recommend for you? Push How to Train Your Dragon 3 into a recommend?
I mean, it's pretty simple for me in that, if you liked the first two films, you're going to like this one, although it probably not quite as much, I would predict. But if you haven't seen the other ones, I would recommend probably starting with the first two rather than jumping into this one. But even if you don't have the time for that, I suspect that you're going to enjoy this film, even if you don't flip for it, even if you don't love it. So yes, I'd recommend on a star rating, I'd give it a 3 out of 5 stars.
3 out of 5. Okay, so I'm at 2, 2.5. It's a basically harmless film that didn't do much for me and didn't do much to offend me. So yeah, I'm about 2.5. Probably 2.5 is most appropriate. Okay, so let's move on to Big Hero 6, which, as I was rewatching the film and saw the credits and saw that both John Lasseter and TJ Miller are involved in this film, and so two Yeah, two shamed human beings, rightly shamed human beings, are involved in this movie. Yet the directors Don Hall, Chris Williams, and the stars Ryan Potter, Scott Ads Adsit, and Jamie Chung. They they are not ashamed. Um, so Big Hero 6 tells the story of Hero, and his uh, departed brother's uh, medical robot Baymax, as they attempt to undergo a revenge plot against the villain that has caused the explosion that killed Hero's brother. Hero teams up five with four other heroes, four other friends, robotics friends of his, and they team up for this particular revenge plot. What did you think of Big Hero 6?
Well, I remembered liking it when it first came out, and rewatching it, I liked it even more. I This was a film that got better, I think, on the second viewing for me, and it was pretty good to start. So yeah, I mean, there's so much that this film does right. It establishes a story world very quickly, creates interesting and sympathetic heroes that are sort of distinctive and memorable, and then creates a conflict which is sort of emotionally motivating and excellently paced and well structured. It has, I think, a sort of a solid climax, some excellent action sequences. There's a few minor criticisms I have, which we can move on to in a little bit, but overall, yeah, this is just a solid film.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said except for when you called it excellently paced. That was the one problem that I found with it. I love the first half of this film. I like the first act. I even like most of the second act. But then there's this sequence where they're kind of doing multiple origins, well, not origin stories, but multiple learning their powers sequences that we see in every superhero film.
You mean the montage?
Exactly. Multiple montages. There are more montages in this than Rocky Four. That's probably not actually true. But these montages of them learning their powers got a little bit too long for me. And it caused the second half of the film to drag. Not only that, you talked about its structure. Its structure is unremarkable because every moment, every beat of this thing is really quite predictable. That said, I love the kind of focus on STEM, on science and technology and robotics, and I love the way robots are treated in this film as not just pets, but actual sort of participatory characters. Baymax is a fantastic character that has dimension. He almost goes through a Terminator 2 Judgment Day story arc, character arc over the course of the film, and all of those things worked for me. So for me, it's a little bit more of a mixed bag, but only because of its pacing and predictability of its structure. When the villain walked onto screen, I was like, that's the villain, and that's the not villain that's going to be pretending to be the villain. And so that kind of predictability of its structure didn't work for me. But overall, I like this film fine.
Yeah, I agree. One of my probably my single largest complaints is the red herring. I didn't buy for a second. I knew exactly who the villain was, and I felt a little insulted that they expected me to buy. It was the red herring character instead. So yeah, that was a disappointment. However, what I didn't quite anticipate, and there's no real way you could, given the way the information is revealed, but what I didn't quite anticipate was the villain's true motivation until they revealed that. And
Sure.
once they reveal that, he's sort of a more compelling character and more sympathetic character in a lot of ways, even though he remains the villain. And then it's all I like, much like in Black Panther, for example. I like it when the villain has sort of a motivation that you can sort of empathize with, rather than just being he's just in it for the money, or he's just a sociopath or something like that, which is kind of obvious and lazy. Um, So I do think that that reveal kind of raised things up a little bit once they reveal who the true villain was. But other things I think praising about it, again, I grew up just south of San Francisco, so to have them watch them sort of transform it into San Francisco, I thought was sort of clever and creative. Although it does sort of imply some kind of Man in the High Castle esque alternate history in which the Japanese won World War II or something along those lines. I
Yeah,
think.
I was never really sure what was going on there, but I just sort of bought it as this is the world we're in. Okay.
Exactly. And it's great because it is recognizably San Francisco, but has a very, very fun twist to it. I love the fact that the main character, a couple of the main characters are Asian Americans, which are horribly
Mhm.
underrepresented in films. This felt in many ways like an anime. Last week we reviewed Alita Battle Angel, and many people were trying to say that that since that was based on an anime, it was trying to sort of recapture the feel of anime. And I love anime, and Alita did not feel like anime to me. Big Hero 6 felt like anime. Felt like
Sure.
really so Americanized, of course, but still great anime. So yeah, and then the in some ways it's weird to pair this with How to Train Your Dragon, because How to Train Your Dragon, of course, is pure fantasy, and this is pure science fiction. And even though fantasy and science fiction are often sort of shoved together as sort of sister genres and sister niches, because geeks tend to like both of them. The compare and contrast between the two in terms of the rules of the world and how they work, really sort of underscores, even though you can sort of see why people might be fans of both of the genres, they're really actually quite distinct in a lot of ways. It's the cheat, of course, is just to use hand wavium and science talk to replace spells or whatever in fantasy. And if you do that, then it can sort of come across like they're basically the same thing. But I think that the Big Hero 6 does a decent job. Obviously, it's not hard science fiction. There's a lot of implausible stuff going on here, but it's not pretending to be anything else. There's enough of a veneer of genuine science and genuine tech going on to make it feel like it's grounded in a world which isn't our world, but nonetheless is at least a world with some genuine constraints to it that create real conflict for the characters to overcome, but nonetheless give them an interesting array of tools that they can use to overcome those conflicts.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think the world building in this film is really good. I mean, that's what I really like about the first act is it does world building both efficiently and consistently. I want to go back to, you talked about how we're sort of pairing this with How to Train Your Dragon. It's the relationship between the protagonist and the not of this world character. So Baymax and Hero and Toothless and Hiccup. And I think that those sort of compare really quite favorably in both films. That when we see when we meet Toothless and Hiccup, their relationship is based upon one of kind of subservience. One is trying to train the other, and then they slowly grow over the course of the franchise to become, emotionally drawn to each other and genuine friends for have a genuine friendship. I think the same is true over the course of Big Hero 6, especially in those final moments when Baymax, completes his Terminator 2 Judgment Day character arc. And yeah, and that mostly works, although there's, sort of plot contrivances involved in that as well. What was oh yeah, you mentioned San Francisco as well. When I was in San Francisco recently, one of the things I thought was, now I know why so many movies are shot here. This is such a cinematic city, and likewise, San Francisco is cinematically rendered quite beautifully here in Big Hero 6.
There is a corner. It's the corner where Hero's mom's cafe is set, and I am maybe 80% positive that they use that exact same corner. Was that?
Is it his aunt? I think it's his
Oh,
aunt.
his aunt. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Anyway,
uh,
bygones.
his so his aunt's cafe. I'm 80% positive they use that exact same corner, but the real corner in Blue Jasmine, and the Woody Allen film Blue Jasmine, which is also set in San Francisco. I mean, it's possible that just looks alike, but it really, I mean, I haven't done a side by side comparison, but I remember it well enough because it's a very distinctive corner, and it looks the same.
Amazing that an animated film could be as real to life as this film. I also, let's shout out the Stan Lee cameo in this
Yes,
film. That's very cool.
Excellent Stan Lee cameo.
Right. I love how they're even able to include the Stan Lee cameos in the animated films, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and this film as well. So what do you give this out of 5? I'm actually genuinely curious where you're going to fall on this one.
Well, first I want to say that I am really hoping that they eventually come back and do a sequel to this film. I mean, this film seems like it could survive a sequel. I mean, it was, I believe, a critical as well as a commercial success. They built this excellent world with these wonderful characters. It seems like it's calling out for a sequel to be made. And I think they made a television show knockoff of it, which I have not watched. But I think if a Big Hero 7 or some such really should be in the works. And if it's not, I'm both disappointed and more than a little surprised.
Yeah, it did win the Academy Award for Best Animated Film, so it got enough critical love for an Oscar nod. I would be okay with a Big Hero 6 Part 2, or as they would probably call it, Big Hero 6 Unite Again, or some other shit. If nothing else, we'll write it and remove all of the objectionable characters or objectionable talent, including John Lasseter. we'll cast who was the person who did the great T.J. Miller impression again?
Justin Ruppel.
Yes, we'll cast Justin Ruppel as Fred in Big Hero 7. Yeah, I wouldn't mind a sequel. It would work. So yeah, I'm at 3 stars on this film. So this one's a recommend, but I still have some issues with it.
I give it 4. Again, I think that its only central flaw is the sort of painfully obvious twist, and it's kind of a glaring flaw. But if you'd removed that one bit, that would be my only note on the script, as it were, or even on the production, is that it's kind of insults the intelligence of your audience to make them think that you have them fooled on that. Either come up with the better twist or don't even bother with a twist at all. But failing that, this is just a solid film. I think it fires on all cylinders and works on every level. 4 out of 5.
Cool. Very good. All right. So let's move on to what isn't 4 out of 5, and that is the Academy Awards happened. Did you watch the Oscars, Garrett?
I did not watch the Oscars, for that matter. I did not watch most of the Oscar-nominated films. They frankly looked at best boring, if not out and out bad. And I mean, I've been complaining to you and in general that this last year was a bad year at least for great movies. There's a decent number of good movies, but very few in the way of what I would consider great movies, ones that are going to stand the test of time. I don't mean to insult Black Panthers to suggest that the only reason it got nominated was because the crowd was weak, but in a lot of ways, it doesn't surprise me too much that this was a year in which Black Panther was a contender for the best film of the year, because quite frankly, it was one of the best films of the year.
Yeah.
And it probably wouldn't have been in a stronger year. So yeah, a lot of the big name ones, again, I can't say whether or not they're bad. Maybe if I saw them, I'd love them. Maybe I would flip for Star is Born genuinely. But you know what? Seemed to me like a film that just didn't need to be made for a 3rd or 4th time. Fourth. Yeah, it's. Again, I got nothing against Lady Gaga. I got nothing against Bradley Cooper, but it just seemed like such a vehicle. It seemed like such a Bradley Cooper wants to be a rock star and Lady Gaga wants to be an actor. And more power to him for that. But personally, I'm just not interested or particularly invested in that storyline again. And I don't care enough about either of them as creators to check it out just because they're doing it.
Yeah,
and similar things for many of the other films. So it was just the roster looked bad. I was not interested.
Well, we did review a couple of the films on the list, including Bohemian Rhapsody and Black Klansman. I mean, fucking Green Book, fucking Green Book. Like this movie, I know you didn't see it, and it's one of the films that we didn't review. But you know, the I cover the Oscars obviously for our audience who might not know. I cover the Oscars for the local news station, and so I felt it incumbent upon myself to see all of the major nominees, as many as I could get my hands on. You know, I start a Oscar to-do list as soon as the nominations come out, and as a result of that, I've seen Green Book. I've seen all of the Best Picture nominees, and Green Book is literally the worst of all of the nominees. There's no doubt about it. Bohemian Rhapsody, which is not a film I liked very much, is a better film than Green Book. Black Panther, I think, is a really solid film. I really like Black Panther. I think that one's going to actually stand the test of time. Same thing with that came out this year: Annihilation, Black Klansman, How Won't You Be My Neighbor, Searching, which is a film that got no Oscar love, Eighth Grade, which got quite a few awards on the other award circuits, but no Oscar love. So overall, the Oscars were really disappointing in the films that we chose to celebrate. I think Green Book is going to go down as the worst Best Picture nominee since, or Best Picture winner since Crash. And that is a really dubious, you know, Crash is fucking awful. And so is Green Book. It's simplistic, it's insulting, let's put it this way, right? This is what we'll say about the Oscars. Peter Farrelly, the director of Dumb and Dumber, who on the set of There's Something About Mary, was running around jokingly taking out his penis and showing it to other cast members. That man has more Oscars for a movie about racism than Spike Lee does. Yeah. Let's allow that to sink in for a moment. That Peter Farrelly and Nick Vallelonga, who tweeted the Trump conspiracy theory about Muslims celebrating on 9/11, the disproven Trump conspiracy theory about Muslims celebrating on 9/11, has more Oscars for a movie about racism than Spike Lee does. This is it's a real shame, and it's a travesty that this is what we're celebrating in 2018, which I agree with you. It's a weaker year. I would call it a mediocre year, something along the you know, I still think there were a lot of good movies made during this year. It's just the average was down from for example, last year.
So now here is where I think I want to sort of turn the narrative a little bit, if you're willing to go with it. Isn't this just an indictment of the Oscars writ large? I mean, isn't the fact that Spike Lee does not, I mean, Spike Lee is a fine scriptwriter, you know, I'm glad to see that he won the best screenplay. But that's not his superpower. His superpower is direction. And he's never won an Oscar for direction. And as you know, Peter Farrelly has. I would contend that any system that's going to give such a auspicious award to Peter Farrelly and not give us award, and not just this year, but any year in the last 25 years, whatever, that Spike Lee has been making movies, there's something wrong with that system. There's something wrong with how that's playing out.
Mm-hmm. I can't disagree with you. Yet it's still the most prestigious award that Hollywood gives itself. It is more prestigious than the Critics' Choice Awards. It's more prestigious than the Golden Globes and all the Guild Awards as well.
So if you want to, then I will turn that to what to me seems like the next logical move. Then isn't this an indictment of awards culture and films? Shouldn't people who love films, both audience members and creators, stop caring about these things. Love the films that you love, reward the films that you reward, and recognize the Oscars and awards in general for what they are: marketing. They're run by people who politic for their films. I mean, there's a reason why Harvey Weinstein had so many Oscar nominations and wins under his belt, is because he was really fucking good at working people to and hustling people to vote. He whipped votes. He should have been in fucking Congress, for God's sakes.
Probably
And
would fit in.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, if if I felt that it rewarded artisanship, if I felt that it rewarded genuine talent, even if I disagreed with the choices that they made, I would recognize the value of the Oscars and similar awards. But I don't think they do that. I think what they have been reduced entirely to a particularly noxious kind of commercial. And that sucks for all the people. I mean, I saw Olivia Colman's acceptance speech, and that was fucking wonderful. I mean, her
Really
gratitude. What's that?
Really quite delightful. I'm agreeing with
Exactly. And I obviously feel bad about basically saying that this institution, which gave her so much joy, is something that should be discontinued, because that was an awesome thing to see. But at the same time, the broader context of it is it's still, it seems to me, it cheapens movies. It does not celebrate them. It does not enhance them. It reduces them to a commercial endeavor, which by itself obviously is not something that's inherently objectionable. But when it pretends to be about the art of filmmaking, that just upsets me, and I can't play along with that.
Okay, so I mean, are you saying that we should get rid of the Oscars, or are you saying that we should consider them reduce their importance? Because I think those are two really different arguments.
Yeah, I could go either way. I mean, in principle, if I could find, if there was a way to make the Oscars more honest about what they were doing, to make them sort of own up to the hustling nature of it, to the political nature of it, rather than pretending like it's about the artistry of it, then I could find that tolerable, even if I wouldn't necessarily embrace it. There might be other ways in which you could reform it to somehow genuinely make it about the artistry, but I don't know how that would work. I don't know how that would happen. I mean, granted, I don't necessarily expect that the Oscars are going to go away. I don't know what the ratings were like this year, but I know that they've been complaining about the ratings going down for a long time. And I kind of,
last year.
yeah, I kind of hope that continues, that people stop caring about the Oscars and they stop tuning in to watch. Then maybe if it stops carrying the cultural importance, maybe they can get back to what it was supposed to be about in the first place, at least nominally. Maybe it never was really about that, but there might be a chance to reclaim the awards for genuine artistry. And if they can pull that off, I would love that. Again, even if I didn't necessarily agree with the choices they made, I could believe that was what was motivating them.
Well, okay. So I love the Oscars, and I love award season, and for three main reasons. First, I do think that it's not just a commercial. I do think that there are some genuine moments when it is celebrating the artistry of film. Maybe not this year, and maybe it's a little bit more difficult for me to find evidence for it this year. But in previous years, some of the best movies that of the year were nominated or won Best Picture. I mean, one of the best movies of the year last year, my favorite movie of the year last year, was nominated for Best Picture. It didn't win, Get Out, but it was nominated. It was celebrated. It was on my radar. And same thing with this year. We wouldn't have seen Cold War, a movie that you and I both liked, you a little bit more than I, if it wasn't for the Oscars. That movie was not on my radar. I had no idea that movie existed until Powell Pawlikowski was nominated for Best Director. So the award show does recognize, or at least put on radar, some levels of excellence and some levels of artistry in film. What is more, it gives studios a reason to make not Transformers 10. Studios can make a Shape of Water a film that probably is not going to have much commercial potential, or Moonlight, a film that's not going to have much commercial potential, because it might break in through the prestige niche of the Academy Awards. It might get awards buzz and then break through into the prestige niche and be able to get an audience that way. So studios are actively greenlighting films that they think are going to win them an Oscar. And that, if it's that motivation, if it takes the existence of the Oscars in order to get studios to be motivated to make those types of films, then I'm all for it. And third, as a kid, as a aspiring young actor, when I was really quite young, the Oscars was a chance to dream. They were a chance to say, one day I'll be up there. Of course, I'm not going to be up there, because this is how things have gone instead of what I thought things were going to go when I was 13, 14, 15. That said, when I was very young, this was a chance for me to set my goals high, set my ambitions high, and it was a motivation to keep working at my craft as a young actor. And I know that there has to be another kid out there who is watching this year, and something about maybe Rami Malek's speech, or Olivia Colman's speech, or Mahershala Ali's speech, or even the female filmmakers who did the documentary Period, End of Story. It's the short, the winner for best documentary short. She got up there, and I think her first line was, "I can't believe a film about menstruation just won an Oscar." And that has to be, it may be a motivation, a difficult, a moment for somebody in a difficult situation who's struggling with their art, who's struggling with being seen in the middle of America, a place where he or she doesn't feel that art is being particularly motivated. This could be a moment that they look forward to and keeps them going through tough times. So I think getting rid of the Oscars totally is not that's not something I would support. What I would support would be making the Oscars a more pure celebration of artistic achievement. And when they sort of flirted with the idea of a best popular Oscar, it's getting away from that. When it's awarding films like Green Book, which is an audience favorite, quote unquote, a certain audience only, then I suspect that is their way of trying to get a more popularized and less artistically pure celebration of film. And I think that that's the move that we've got to correct. We've got to start correcting the Oscars so that it is what it was meant to be, and a celebration of artistic achievement, and not I agree with you that there is a certain degree of commerciality to it. And to some degree, I'm okay with that, because it motivates studios to make prestige films. But I would like that to be pulled back a little bit, so that it is an award show that's celebrating things like Shape of Water, Get Out, Black Klansman this year. I don't know why Annihilation wasn't nominated for anything. Eighth Grade was one of the most interesting films of the year. That wasn't nominated for anything. So the really good art that was made this year was not represented at the Oscars. And so I think it's a little faulty to say that let's blame the whole system for the fact that this year was shitty.
So starting with some agreements, you're definitely right that sometimes they get it right. Sometimes they nominate, and sometimes they award genuinely, if not necessarily the best, amongst the best films, actors, directors, etc. They get it right sometimes. That's not too surprising just when you consider the scope and range of films that are being made. It's going to happen. I mean, I don't want to say broken clock is right twice a day sort of phenomenon, because they're right more often than that. But that's just a way of saying that there's going to be a certain amount of overlap between when you throw X amount of money at a project, you're going to attract X amount of talent, and when you have you're going to get a result that's going to be hopefully wide good. In other words, I'd say it's not totally a coincidence, but it's not exactly integral either. So also another agreement, it does sometimes push studios to make funding decisions and greenlight films that they may not otherwise greenlight, and they often can be very, very good. And so my cinematic viewing experience is richer as a result of that, and that's also a definite benefit. So elements of agreement on those 2 points. Where I disagree, though, is that again, for every time they get it right, there's other times when they get it wrong. And it's not just this year. It's not like this was just I mean, again, I think it was a bad year for film, but it's not like this was just a bad year for the Oscars. It was a bad year for the Oscars, but it was hardly unique in that respect. There's been better years. There's been years that I like more, but there's also been years, which you mentioned Crash. I could name several others between now and then, which may not be quite as egregious as Green Book or Crash, but are still equally sort of disappointing misfires, films that quite frankly just didn't belong. Ditto for the sort of the reverse of that. You get Oscar bait. You get films being made precisely because the studio wants this to win Oscars, and it's really kind of insulting. I mean, again, the filmmakers themselves may be solid filmmakers, but they get this albatross hung around their neck of they're the bait on the hook, so the studio can run this out, and that cheapens the whole process too. And then, but also, as you note, I think it's a mistake sort of to say that, you take away the Oscars, you're not going to see those ones. You may not see the same ones, but, I don't know if the studio, when they backed Eighth Grade, was thinking, oh, we'll get some Oscars here, and they just ended up being wrong or not. But I suspect that they had no particular illusions about Eighth Grade winning awards. They made Eighth Grade because Bo Burnham has talent. He had a good screenplay. He put together good people, and he made a film that worked. There's going to be plenty of that. In fact, I mean, again, I'm obviously not an economist of any kind, much less a show business economist, but I think maybe if you we're able to start redirecting a lot of the resources that are spent trying to politic for films and awards, you might be able to redirect some of those funds to actual films that otherwise wouldn't get made, because they're being crowded out by the calendar and of all the awards season films, and the budgets are being redirected to promotion for the Oscars rather than the production of the films. So, in a parallel universe where there is no Oscars, I don't see reasons for thinking that there's necessarily going to be fewer great movies, or fewer sort of indie darlings that the studios aren't getting behind. There would be different ones, no doubt. The decisions matrices would change. We would not have the same films, but I think we would have just as many good films. It wouldn't all be Transformers 10.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and perhaps I'm being a little hyperbolic by saying that everything's going to be Transformers 10. I'm sure that you're right, that there aren't going to be, that it's not just going to be that Guillermo del Toro is still going to be able to get a job not making Pacific Rims for the rest of his life. I get that, but nevertheless, these studios are making decisions based upon award season. Like that's just a fact.
And sometimes they're good decisions, and sometimes they're bad decisions. I haven't done an exhaustive enough analysis to say on balance how it comes out, but I would like to imagine they could do better if they were focusing on art.
Yeah, I mean, I think where we agree is that when the Oscars are good and when movies are good, it's because there are artists behind them who are working damn hard to make a good movie, who understand the art of filmmaking and who are trying to do the best. I think Oscar as an institution is a net good for the film community. Although I'm having some relationship issues with them this year.
So then maybe we can sort of at least highlight some good things that came out of it. Again, I already mentioned that Spike Lee did win Best Adapted Screenplay, which deserved. I think someone said that 5 out of the last 6 best directors now are Mexicans or come or descent Mexican, either Mexicans or of Mexican descent, which is kind of awesome. One might even say they're sending their best. Um, and
Alfonso Cuarón, Guillermo del Toro, and uh, Alexandro Gonzalez Inarritu have won 5 of the last 6. Damien Chazelle for La La Land is the only American who's won since in that time period. So yeah.
And so that's pretty cool. And I remember I've been seeing headlines that a record number of women and women of color won awards this year, and that's awesome. I'm glad to see that they're taking that Oscars so white thing a little seriously and trying to sort of see past the white palette. Green Book notwithstanding, that in some ways at least kind of mitigates that that negative fallout.
Yeah, and some of the short films that I saw this year, many of them were really good. Skin, that won Best Live Action Short, is a really creepy, interesting, a little obvious, a little on the nose kind of movie. I really liked it. I mean, one of the things I enjoy about the Oscars is every year I get to see the Oscar shorts, animated and live action, and so there's some really inventive filmmaking going on in those, and those sort of hopefully parlay themselves into good feature debuts for those filmmakers as well. I thought some of the speeches were great. I liked Rami Malek's speech, and then his press room afterwards. He talked about his Egyptian heritage and becoming the first Egyptian American actor to receive an award. Talked about he spoke in Arabic to young actors and young performers in the Middle East. So that's, I mean, there are good things that are happening as a result of these things, and I just wish that we could have all of the good things and none of the Green Book. But yeah, let's see. Any other big reactions from the? Did you get anything else from the Oscars?
Spider-Verse won.
Yeah,
made film. I think that Bell Wright seems to have been the right choice there. So credit where it's due.
it certainly was. It certainly was. In fact, we I was looking at the crossover between my best of list and the Oscar winners, and Spider-Verse was one of the ones where I was like, yes, this is absolutely the right choice. And Roma is a good film. It's a film that's hard to get into. It's a film that's really it requires a lot of patience. But the more I've thought about it, the more I'm turning to like it. Its cinematography was well deserved as the best cinematography of the year. So yeah, I go ahead.
I think Moonlight also was a film that required patience, and that was justly rewarded for being a phenomenal film. But again, not to go back into the criticism, but I've heard several analysts say that the reason why Roma didn't win is because it was a Netflix film, and there's a bias against that by many in the Academy, which again, were this really just about what were the best films, what's the best art, that shouldn't play a role. But who knows? Maybe those analysts are wrong. Maybe that wasn't a factor.
Yeah, I mean, Steven Spielberg did come out against the Netflix release model, because the Netflix release model, if Roma had won, could have changed the industry, and could have spelled some bad news for theaters as well. But that's probably a conversation for another news item and another day. I think we've adequately covered the Oscars and also said fucking Green Book enough times. If we haven't, then we'll say it one more time. Fucking
Green Book.
God. I'm kind of excited for you to see it. I toyed with the idea of suggesting that we review Green Book with Driving Miss Daisy next week, just so that we could lean into the Oscar bullshit.
So, someone called Green Book Driving Miss Daisy 2 Daisy's Revenge.
Yeah, well, Spike Lee, I think, had the line of the night in his post-Oscars press conference. Every time somebody's driving somebody, I lose. They just reverse positions. All right, so that was the Oscars. We will table all discussion of award shows for another year, and move right on. So next week, what do we got next week? We are doing an Oscar. This would be called an Oscar bait film. It is Destroyer, the Nicole Kidman film. Her aborted attempt to win a Best Actress award. We are pairing that with The French Connection in our movie club. So next week we will review Destroyer, and we will talk about The French Connection and whatever news happens between now and then. Until then, I am Jim.
And I'm Garrett.
And this has been
Jim and Garrett at the movies. Good night, everybody.